Good morning.
Hi, Natrice. How are you?
Busy, but good.
Good.
Morning, everybody.
Morning, David. Okay, friends, I have a hard stop at 11:30, so we're going to be super efficient in this meeting today.
Absolutely.
And also, I will be in Dallas for the week before our next meeting, so you guys will get your packets probably like 2 weeks before instead of a week, but you'll have 2 projects to review that we'll be going over, so you'll probably need the extra time anyway.
Okay.
Cool. Hi, Alethea.
Hello, how are you?
Good, thank you. How are you?
Doing great. Just had a busy weekend. It was my son's 8th birthday.
Wow.
Love it. That's awesome. Happy birthday to him.
Yes. So rolling back into Monday, feeling good. How's everybody?
Good.
Good.
Great. Nicole should be joining us, but if for some reason she doesn't, we can certainly get started. I know the agenda can be tight. Oh, here she comes. She's me right now.
She's you with a picture of her.
Well, that's new. I'm normally coming in as her. So
that's funny. Hi, everyone. I'm Nicole.
You can.
I'm going to rename myself here.
Okay, we'll go ahead and do quick introductions. I think most of us know each other on the call, but since we have a presentation from Epic, we'll go ahead and get started. And then, because I have to keep us on schedule today because we're tight. So I will go ahead. You all know me, so I'm not going to do like a huge introduction of myself, but I'm Natrice Bryant. Nice to see everybody. Carrie
Schiff. I'm on this advisory committee because I'm an EDC commission member, and I'm very happy that we're having this presentation from Epic. So thank you.
Perfect. David.
Good morning, everybody. I'm David Dragoo, and I am a fellow EDC commissioner along with Carrie.
Awesome. Alethea.
Yes, I am Alethea Gomez, Director of Programs and Initiatives at Epic.
Nicole.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Nicole Reel, and I serve as President and CEO of Executives Partnering to Invest in Children.
Mike. If you're talking, you're on mute. We can't hear you. Okay, we'll come back to Mike. Jeff, just real quick intros.
Hey, everybody, this is Jeff Kraft, Director of Business Funding and Incentives and Deputy Director at OEDIT. Work closely with the Economic Development Commission and also starting to work on housing related issues. And so looking to work with and partner with the P3 division. Good to see everybody.
Thank you. And Virginia.
Good morning, everyone. Virginia Davis, OEDIT and EDC staff.
Perfect. Okay, everybody. Like I said, good morning. We have had, oh, did I hear something? Sorry. We had a request from our commissioners in regard to how, we're making decisions in relation to early child care and early childhood development across the state. As we've noticed in the past couple of submissions, most of our submissions have been early child care projects. And so really looking to lean on Epic and leadership from Nicole and Alethea in regard to how we're making decisions, what funding components we need to take into consideration. As we know, capital construction is pretty high. And so how do we strategically work together to ensure that not only our commissioners have all the information that they need to make decisions on these projects, but also that they have the tools that are necessary from all of our partners across the state. So we thought it would be great to bring Epic into this discussion and talk a little bit about the economic impacts and then how business models can and should be put together as it relates to early child care expansion for P3. So Nicole and Alethea, I will go ahead and turn it over to you.
Great, thanks so much. I'm going to turn it over to Nicole, who's going to talk through some of the economic imperatives of childcare, and then we'll move on to a little bit of our community work and initiatives, and of course, breaking down the childcare business model with you all. So Nicole.
Awesome, thanks, Alethea. All right, well, good morning, everyone. Thanks again for having us today. We really appreciate it. Just a little bit of a background on EPIC. So you know who we are. Executives Partnering to Invest in Children was founded 13 years ago in Colorado by a group of business executives and CEOs and business leaders who really wanted to create an organization that could serve as the business community's voice in support of early childhood policies, investments, and also workforce solutions. So we really do serve as the business community's nonpartisan voice in support of those things. And our work really is encompassed in 4 different areas. The first is in the area of workforce, working with employers directly to help them retain and attract the best workforce possible, which oftentimes includes working around childcare benefits and looking at ways employers can address some of those needs so that they can tap into and keep that valuable pipeline of talent that they need. Second is leadership and education. We do a lot of work with business chambers of commerce, business organizations, economic development entities to talk about the bottom line and economic impacts and importance of childcare for the workforce and early education. We work on childcare infrastructure in our communities across the state, which includes looking at things like real estate, the cost of facilities, public-private partnerships, financing, regulation, things that we know tend to serve as primarily barriers to entry for this industry. And then lastly, policy. So bipartisan policy and advocacy, which is really kind of the little p and big P policy. So we do have a lobbyist at the Capitol, and we get involved in conversations around things like universal preschool and, you know, tax credits and all sorts of other mechanisms as well. And we did, I'm happy to say that we did help work on the creation of the P3 office as well, which we're really excited about. So just a couple of I think high-level data points that we wanted to ground everyone in and make sure that everyone was on the same page around childcare in Colorado. We, of course, have a wonderful state to live and work in. I think, you know, Governor Polis always likes to say the secret's out. It's very true. You know, of course, we've had population growth, job growth, and really industry diversification and growth here in Colorado. But at the same time, unfortunately, we've also lost tens of thousands of childcare slots in our state. Even as we've seen tremendous growth over the past decade or so, unfortunately, we've seen a lot of childcare businesses close. So we haven't seen the same effect in terms of childcare business creation and or sustainability in Colorado. And of course, we know that our skilled talent and workforce pipeline is really in the middle of those two things. We want to make sure people can work. We want to make sure that they can enter the talent pipeline when and where and how they want to. And unfortunately, we know that there are a lot of people who really aren't right now because of childcare issues. So just a couple data points here. Of course, we know that generally speaking, we still skew as a pretty young state. Lots of families here in Colorado, people moving here. I think a couple of things to point out. We know a lot of people move to Colorado and are transplants, meaning they actually don't have as many family friend networks available to them to oftentimes help with childcare. And then also we've got some studies that have recently come out, Pew Research, the one you see on the right of the slide, you know, asking people why they left a job in 2021. And of course, pay and advancement opportunities are at the top, but the third most common response is that, or I should say fourth, is because of childcare issues. So it is cited quite often as a reason as to why people are leaving a job. And oftentimes are actually exiting the workforce. We know that that tends to mean that women, and in general, women of color also tend to be disproportionately impacted with those as well. We'll kind of skip past this quickly, but of course we know that there are lots of families who are depending on childcare in order to actually just show up to work. So we've got about 16% of our US workforce, again in Colorado, because we're a younger state, it's about 20% of our workforce dependent on childcare just to show up to work. And that's 1 million families here in our state. And we also know, of course, too, based on the information coming out of the Fed, that we are seeing a decline in terms of women participating in the workforce here in the US. Now, that's not the same trend that we're seeing in other countries, specifically in other countries that tend to have greater childcare supports and greater childcare access and affordability. But I think worthy to note that we have definitely seen an overall decline as that childcare access and affordability has moved. And we actually are going to have some updated numbers for this pretty soon, but we also know that right now, or this was actually a study that came out in March of 2020, that it was costing our state, the state of Colorado, $2.2 billion in economic cost each year due to the childcare shortage that we have specifically for infants and toddlers. So we do break this data down for different counties and areas of the state as well, just to kind of show like what that economic impact is for employers and different counties in our state. But really, if you take the GDP of agriculture, forestry, hunting, and fishing in Colorado, this is an opportunity cost of about 20,000 jobs, or half of what those industries actually produce in GDP here in Colorado. So not an insignificant number. Of course, you know that job recovery is growing. We still have yet to see some of those specific demographics recover fully in terms of job growth. Specifically, we know that the labor force participation rate continues to be lower than it was pre-pandemic, in particular for women with children. And then looking at childcare supply here in Colorado, there's a lot of numbers here. We have basically a gap of about 90,000 childcare slots in Colorado. So in other words, most of our state, actually, I will take that back. All of our state, with the exception of one county in Colorado, is considered a childcare desert when it comes to infant and toddler care. And what that means is that for every one childcare slot available, there are 3 or more children who need that care slot. And that applies for our entire state, with the exception of, I believe, San Juan County in Colorado. So that's a pretty dire situation for most families, and obviously puts them in a bind when it comes to returning to the workforce or remaining in the workforce. And then you can see here in terms of our urban versus rural supply, we also have some pretty significant and disparate gaps in terms of our supply. So, you know, we do obviously see areas like El Paso where we've still got lots of children who need care, but not enough. But also it applies certainly in our rural areas where perhaps we may have towns or certain areas of our state that have no childcare at all. I have some family who live in Fowler, Colorado, and they had one childcare facility in Fowler. And as a result of the pandemic, that one facility closed. So although it's a small community, they no longer have childcare anywhere nearby. And so all of the nurses and Department of Corrections folks and other people who live there are, you know, cobbling together childcare through various neighbors or, you know, different things that they can just kind of piece together as needed. All right, so hopefully that's some good information. We sped through that, but I'm going to hand it over to Alethea so she can talk about the childcare business model a little bit too.
Thank you so much. So obviously, as all of you know, right, childcare is a hot button here in Colorado, and it has some very unique challenges to it when it comes to starting and sustaining a business here in Colorado, as you've seen from many of the financial models that you went through. So I wanted to start briefly just by going over really what brought EPIC into this work, and supporting both the creation of the Public-Private Partnership Office and also working to assist in any way we can to helping bring those priority areas to fruition and really understand how childcare businesses themselves can be reasonably supported through a program like this. So some of you may have heard about EPIC's Building Up initiative, and that initiative really takes a look at the most critical barriers that childcare providers are facing in working to start their businesses. And we see that as real estate, access to capital, and then of course, local regulation and other requirements that providers have to face in order to sort of surmount the costs and other necessary components to start their businesses. So this sort of image here really looks at the intersections of those barriers and what potential solutions exist to help mitigate them. so that providers can really have an easier time, right, pursuing their businesses. So some of the things that we've been working on within Building Up, and Latrice, I know you were gracious enough to attend our retreat last fall and hear some of those efforts moving forward. So of course, the child care contribution tax credit we've been working hard on, and congratulations that it went through the Finance Committee last week, and working to build in-kind donations into that CCTC tax credit so that buildings and land can be donated. And then the difference between the market rate and what they charge providers can be returned back as a tax credit up to 50%. We're also looking at technical assistance. For many childcare projects, they have certain components together, maybe the vision of the program and the location where they want to open, but business modeling, business planning, construction, all those other components like regulations, providers need support with. So we're looking at expanded technical assistance options for those providers. And then integration into affordable housing and mixed development. We know that there is great opportunity both with co-location within affordable housing, as well as integrating childcare into mixed development. So we're keeping an eye on the budgets and allocations there for housing and mixed development programs to see how we can support those providers within those constructs. And then finally, although this is not ready for prime time yet, we are dreaming up what it could look like to have a childcare impact fund here in Colorado. And again, this is just a little drawing that we sort of created to help illustrate how partners could work together to integrate into a model like this. Thank you, Latrice, for inviting us to the EC Commission conversation and sort of bringing that to the forefront and really realizing that the Building Up efforts for capital financing are really parallel to what P3 is really trying to solve, right? There's not enough funds within one single bucket in order to fully fund the childcare projects needs here in the state. So how could that possibly work? We know that lenders and CDFIs and other, institutions that are willing to lend and offer loans and financial support to projects have difficulty taking on everything that they need to within their risk profile in order to make those things happen. And so we're thinking about a model where philanthropy, state and local funds can be blended with lenders and create a guarantee fund pool so that CDFIs and other lenders can directly fund development, construction, and technical assistance for providers that are looking to start their business. So really excited to see what the parallels are for that project and that effort and what P3 is working on too with their finance structure. Okay, so we're going to hop into the childcare business model, and I'm sure if I asked for a show of hands of who feels they intricately understand childcare operations, maybe not too many would go into the air. So we're going to break down just a few main components and really what we should be looking at when we're evaluating childcare financial proposals. So the first thing to know about the childcare business model is that it's highly sensitive to a few key factors, and it usually has slim profit margins. The majority of providers in the state of Colorado are working with a 3% or less profit margin within their business model. And you probably noticed that a lot of our larger national childcare providers work with a profit, and we'll talk a little bit about how they make that happen. So for this business model scenario, this comes from the report that we released with the Common Sense Institute last year on the growing strain on the childcare business model. And this demonstrates, as you can see, a breakdown of the major components of the business model and how it impacts profitability and operations. So if you take a look at monthly tuition, for example, this center is charging between $1,500 and $2,000 per month for their students, which is pretty average, more on the high end of what the market norm is. So they're bringing in over $2 million in revenue from 136 children within this model. They're keeping their infant and toddler numbers low because the cost of care, as we'll demonstrate in a minute, for infants and toddlers is astronomically higher than the older students. So even with all of that and with wages as a share of revenue below 60%, which is well below the market average, this center is only bringing in $8,200 a year in profit. And so you can imagine if their enrollment rate fell below that 81%, or they were impacted in any other large ways, their business model would quickly fail. And many centers, like many centers, would have to close, right? Because there's no way for them to sustain that business model long term, right? Even though their tuition models are close to top of the market and they're doing their best to pay their teachers fair wages at $16 to $30 an hour. So the main cost drivers in any childcare business model are going to be centered around three factors. The first is, of course, families and revenue. What enrollment and utilization percentage that you have by age group, as well as your tuition rates, are really going to drive the total revenue number that any childcare can expect. And so that's why we're always asking questions about how many infants and toddlers are you planning into this childcare model? What do you plan to charge for tuition, so we can understand how those two intersect? The second, and usually the primary cost driver, is workforce and wages, and that's not unlike other business models, but the only way for them to pay their teachers is the cost of tuition. And so that quickly becomes a slippery slope as you try to raise tuition and make sure that families have access, and also ensure that early childhood educators have a good career path and a good working environment. And so staffing levels and ratios will also factor heavily into what that staffing cost looks like. And then finally is the overall operational decision. So this comes into the layout of the center, the square footage that's allotted per child, and then the configuration of classrooms across the center, and then whatever partnership financial structure, right, that the operator is going to choose. And so for a lot of the projects that we've been presented, it's an entity that's going to engage an operator. And so the bottom line will also be heavily affected by how that partnership structure is constructed. So as I mentioned before, tuition drives revenue. So this is a very common tuition structure for a basically profitable center. When you look across the scheduling, you'll see obviously there's a decrease for less attendance, but the top full-time tuition that these parents are paying for an infant is $21.50 per month, right? Which is over $25,000 a year. Which is well into the 20 to 35% range of many incomes here in Colorado. And it's really just something that a lot of parents cannot afford. But this is a common tuition structure that would allow for either break even or a small percentage of profit. So this breaks down just an example of what profitability looks like by age group. In this model, this would be an entity that chooses to host the childcare within their building and donates facility costs to the overall operating childcare business model. And so it's broken down by classroom staff, center staff, and then adds those respective percentages from the facility costs. And then as you can see, you're going to lose a lot more money on the infant toddler side than the toddler and older groups size. And so really, for very simply, you're going to lose about $15,000 every year for an infant or toddler, and you're going to make a little bit closer to 15 to 20 for each pre-K student. And so that's mainly based in staffing. So as you know, infants and toddlers require more teachers for less children. And so that's the main components about how that financial model breaks down. But this kind of illuminates why most centers and many centers that are beginning to start really have to think about their infant toddler percentage utilization before they consider profits. And so it's also a huge indicator of why our infants and toddlers are in the greatest need of slots at this time. So taking the profitability, the tuition, all of those things and integrating them in, these are the key assumptions in the financial model that this group will want to look at when they consider profitability and also viability over time, right? So again, some of this is repeated information, but just presented in a different way so you can align it with the models and understand how they interact. So the key components are going to be enrollment rate, again, percentage of those slots filled. Most centers cannot survive financially unless they are at least 75% full. And for most of them, that needs to be between 80 and 85. So slots per room, of course, staffing, staff benefits. We usually anticipate that that's 25% gross up on total wages. And so you want to keep an eye on that percentage within any financial model to understand how benefits will be provided within that environment. And then also the facility cost, right? There's a lot of complicated facility pieces, right, with the P3 and what you guys are considering for projects. And so that facility cost needs to be well developed within that financial model so that it's accurate to how it's going to impact the bottom line for operations. And then, of course, food can be $150,000 a year decision. And so providing food or, having that component within your financial model can also have huge impacts. And then finally, tuition and revenue, and then operator administration overhead, right? So for some large national providers, they already have that built in because they have an entire network of back support. And then for smaller providers, that number might have to be reimagined or shared in the space that they occupy. And so taking those key assumptions, I've laid it out over a potential center model here so that you can kind of see where those pieces interact and how they get assigned to both administrators and teachers and how that impacts overall operations. So what I've broken down for you here is just a sample center, operating hours, number of children, revenue, space assumptions, costs, and then the differences between outsourcing and self-operating as you may be evaluating different kinds of projects within those realms. And so this is really just for you to peruse, nothing major to point out here, but it's just an opportunity for you to see how that structure would be laid out in an actual center. So as I said before, there are main cost drivers in the childcare business model, and those cost drivers impact profitability and they drive profitability. So what we did in our CSI report last year was we drew out a couple of scenarios in which we eliminated or changed some of those cost drivers within the same configurations of the previous model to see how it would impact the bottom line. And the most impactful piece that we found was removing the occupancy cost from the childcare business model. For example, the scenario number 2 at the top of the slide looks at if an operator were to just lower their tuition, right, a little bit, increase their wages for their teachers by $1 across the board. You can see that it took their original profit and loss and increased it quite a bit in both scenarios. So it's not easy, right? Operators cannot just decide, we want to make our center more accessible, so we're going to lower our tuition and we're going to raise our wages this year, right? And that drives them further and further into either debt or the need to be subsidized before they can sustain their operations. However, when we took those same business models and we just eliminated the rent expense alone, we saw an increase in profits that ranged from 600 to 2,600% on their bottom line. And so if operators can identify a free or low cost space in which to operate, it drastically improves their opportunity to both make a profit and divert those funds into areas of their business model like workforce wages that can increase their opportunity, right, to survive in the communities where they operate. So I'll take a pause there. I saw the chat was going. I assume Nicole maybe attended to some of those questions, but I just wanted to take a pause to see if anyone wanted to talk through any of those components or had any questions.
The chat was more, we were excited about slides being shared. Any questions from anyone in the group in regard to the models, the information that was given? While people are thinking, I do want to say, one of the things that I find really helpful with the slide deck is we've constantly been saying, like, what's the right financial model and what does it take to generate revenue? So the slide that you had that shows kind of what that looks like, I think is really important for us to take a look at as it relates to a couple of projects we've received that, you know, have come in and said, here's how much we're going to pay our director and here's how much we're going to pay, you know, our teachers. This model really does help us, I think, look at some comparisons and see if it's something that could actually work, or if we need to push back and have some questions about what the finance model looks like. So I think that that's super helpful for us. I don't know if anyone else thinks the same.
And I think, you know, the other thing, we've done a lot of pro forma modeling for childcare business models really all across the state of Colorado. And I think at the end of the day, like, you know, a profitable or at least a break-even business model is typically looking at a combination of subsidizing the cost through low cost or free real estate, and hopefully, you know, no taxes to go along with that, lower wages for teachers, or higher costs for parents. I mean, there's usually some combination of those three things happening in order to make a childcare business model work. Like you can't offer quality, pay your teachers well, you know, charge families a reasonable amount of money and have a profitable childcare business or something that's sustainable. It just won't happen. So
should we be thinking about, you know, I think about our discussions of are these projects supposed to somehow repay the state at some point? And this is a hard one to figure out that should make sense at all, because what we're looking to do is, you know, build more and just make them sustainable.
Yeah.
But I can see a need for guardrails to ensure that this extra profitability is actually worked back into these businesses and not taken out of the businesses, that they are instead used for making sure that there is adequate infant and toddler capacity, and that there is adequate, you know, that the tuition is achievable for families, and that the workforce is paid reasonably. I'm sitting here with my, you know, worst nightmare is a larger provider of these that's backed by private equity comes in and says, hey, here's a great opportunity.
Yep.
You know, and we can just suck more profit out of these things, and that, or use the money that we're going to make on a site that we have worked on through the P3 unit, and we're going to take that money and go subsidize something that we didn't intend them to subsidize, a different business.
Yeah.
So that,
and that brings me to the topic of my last slide. So we'll get to that in just a minute, and really talking about that idea of revenue generation and how that's really going to work potentially here. So David.
Yeah, just a question. When we're evaluating these facilities, is there a big difference between outsourced management versus one that it's owner operated? I know there was a slide that said kind of had a breakdown. I didn't get to read it. I'm just curious what your thoughts are when we're evaluating. Is that a question we should ask?
Yeah, so depending on the operating partnership structure, and certainly there's many ways to approach it, the main differences between outsourcing and self-operating is usually like a management fee that the operator will ask for when you outsource. So, you know, Bright Horizons for UNC would be a great example of that, right? Most likely, Bright Horizons is going to charge UNC an annual management fee. We've seen anywhere from $150K to $350K in order to run that business, dependent upon the size. And then usually when you outsource, you don't have quite as much say usually in the environment that's being set up, the curriculum that's being taught. Again, that is dependent upon the partnership structure itself. Usually the more influence you have on an outsourced operator, the more you share the bottom line responsibility, right? So if you want to have a say in what wages are being paid, if you want to have a say in the benefit structure, if you want to have a say in the tuition, they'll usually say, great, we'll charge lower tuition and higher wages, but you need to subsidize that cost, right? In order for us to make our anticipated profit, and that increase in cost is X number of dollars, right? And that we've seen that range be high as well, right? Anywhere from 250 to just under $1 million a year. So those are going to be just the main differences dependent upon partnership negotiations.
Okay, thanks. And I think some other questions I had, I can hold till the end. So appreciate it.
Okay, Jeff, I saw you had your hand up as well.
Yeah, hey, I just want to dig a little bit deeper with you into the real estate models, given the need for the real estate subsidy. I'm thinking about this just based on my own personal experience. Obviously, a couple of the models that I think I've seen or heard of is, a nonprofit, maybe a religious entity that doesn't
Mhm.
use its classrooms, except on limited times, so they can do a community benefit scenario. I think there's a building that has a highest best use from a profit making perspective. It may make extra space either from a community benefit perspective or to benefit tenants or something like that, like ground floor care. So, and then maybe there's like the UNC model where there's a workforce retention benefits of the employer sort of
Right.
stuff. Are there any other models for getting subsidized real estate or are there any other sort of ways that we can help get subsidized real estate? I suppose another one would be if the land is, like the state provides the land for the project too, or something like that, and has
Yeah.
a rule that the operator has to then use that or something. But just curious if there's any other real estate subsidy models to think about.
Yeah, I think, we're exploring more than one, right? I think you mentioned quite a few that we're considering, right? First floor of mixed use developments, integration into affordable housing, and then working on incentives, right? That are regulatory, tax credit based and otherwise to incentivize land and business owners and developers as well, right? That maybe usually wouldn't consider childcare as a tenant because they're usually higher cost, higher depreciation over time and aren't necessarily as big of a monetary benefit to them, right? But if they look at both the tax benefit and hopefully a financial benefit, right, that's laid in to say, if you prioritize childcare within your development on your land in your building, you will get this tax credit plus hopefully an additional financial incentive that can be passed down to the operator so that they are then either in a free or low cost space. And so besides the one that you mentioned, we're really working hard at the policy level, and I should give all the praise to Nicole for that, to really think about wider community incentives for more people to get involved, right? Employer consortiums could also form, right? Where they could get together and form a nonprofit arm of that employer partnership and spread that financial subsidy across several employers instead of putting that, $500,000 per year in the lap of one person. And so that's something we're talking about in our denser metro areas. And we know that we have healthcare and other, critical industry partners, manufacturing, casinos, et cetera, that are interested in partnership models like that. And I'm sure Nicole has additional thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, when it comes to real estate for childcare, we just know that it doesn't pencil out as a great tenant or business decision, frankly, in a lot of circumstances. It's not a business model that can generally afford market rate. If you're looking at LIHTC development, typically it's something that, the underwriters and the financial partnerships that are formed, don't really see as an ideal tenant, doesn't fit in well. The TI is unique to childcare, and there's not a lot of technical assistance around that either. So we're trying to find ways. I think daylighting public real estate is a great opportunity. I think it's awesome that the state has come along as a partner and said, hey, how can we utilize our assets for this? We have a lot of other publicly owned real estate across Colorado that frankly is underutilized or vacant, but it's not inventoried. And so I'd love to find a way to do that and build that into the state map that's been created through the P3 office so that municipalities, counties, other political subdivisions like school districts or special districts could daylight some of those opportunities as well. Looking at churches and how some of those faith-based facilities could also be repurposed. And then, taxes have a huge implication on the business model here too. Some of these childcare businesses pay over $100,000 a year in commercial property taxes. Gallagher was kind of pushing those rates up and up and up for a lot of communities. And, that just basically means they charge families more or they pay teachers less when they pay those taxes. So I think, there are all of those things feed into the business model, and we're trying to look at ways to say, hey, how can we mitigate this? But I also think it's a great opportunity. Most of the employers and community partnerships we've worked with around childcare Many of them also treat this as an economic development opportunity for a childcare business, a small business, right? To say, hey, like, you don't have the capital to build an $8 million facility, or you don't have the ability to scale up, but you know how to operate childcare facilities and you're very good at it. So we're going to bring you in as our partner to operate this facility, right? Give that business owner, typically a woman, an opportunity to grow and expand their business, and then also have the opportunity to offer childcare to the community.
Yes, and so, I'll just go over this last slide. This is certainly not meant to be an exhaustive list of your priorities, but just some things to think about, right? So when you're looking at that childcare business model, UNC is a great example, right? You have an opportunity to say, great, we could give these guys X number of dollars, right? And it's going to produce revenue, right? But the idea of revenue generation is highly dependent upon children that are being served and families that are being served, how accessible that center is, and then how likely it is, right, that a talented early childhood workforce is going to engage in that environment and sustain it. So evaluating those impacts of the development against the potential for revenue generation, right? What are we prioritizing when we're looking at projects, and what components are factoring into that potential for revenue generation, and is that the right project for P3 to publicly support? And then pursuing collaborative funding efforts, as we were discussing, to support childcare development cost, and then also debt reduction for operators. So that includes startup costs, incoming debt, and overall cost drivers within the business model. And then assessing the childcare operational pro forma, right, for all of those areas that we discussed. I looked through a few of the pro formas that were shared with me through the project proposal evaluation process. And I think for the most part, you just really want to make sure that they're being transparent about their staffing levels and pay, as well as what they plan to charge parents, and have them answer some questions, right, about the ideal populations that are going to be served, and really how this childcare will impact the community at large positively. And so I know that there's a lot of different considerations that you're making when assessing these proposals. But Natrice, if I had one piece of worry, right, during that meeting, it was really about the potential for revenue generation in order for P3 to be able to, I think you use the word recycle the funds, right there. And so if that is a critical component of P3 being able to fund projects, then if childcare is 90%, right, of our proposals, then I think that bears on this group an opportunity to evaluate what can we do, right, to generate revenue, and what can we eliminate from that operator's bottom line and cost model that can enable them to be profitable and enable the P3 office to actually support the projects, right, without just having $5 million disappear into the ethers without really understanding what's going to happen in the community as a result.
Thank you so much for that, Alethea and Nicole. I think, as we're starting to go through this, and we appreciate you all being on this call and talking through us about the expertise that you've found, because as we are doing this, one of the requirements is that there has to be some sort of revenue generation, which is what we've heard is we can't just grant funds out, right? We have to have a conversation about what money is coming back in so that we can then create more opportunities. And that's our end goal, is to not only fund projects, but also create more opportunities for us to continue to fund those projects as we're starting to see the need. And I think the numbers that you showed us earlier today are astronomical. And so, like, how do we find a good model so that we can actually utilize a model that is replicable across the state? And I know each county is going to be different and each project is going to have something different, but if there's something we can look at, which I think is in your slide decks, we can definitely take that and say, hey, we have questions in regard to this. You said that your funding model is X, and we have some good data that shows us this is what we actually should be paying our staff in order to keep them and retain them. Because as we talk a little bit more about this, workforce is another issue that we have to deal with. It's not just, creating the place, it's also making sure we can retain the staff. So really do appreciate the two of you being a part of this partnership and being here for us so that we can ask questions, lean on you forward you documents and things of that nature. And then also that you're asking questions when we're presenting the projects as well. So thank you both for being here. Appreciate it.
Yeah, it's our pleasure. And I popped my email in there. I assume it's been shared within this group before, but if any of you want to reach out after or have an offline conversation, I'm available.
Yeah, we love to geek out on real estate and financing and childcare and pro forma modeling. So honestly, feel free to reach out to us as resources.
Perfect. We will definitely do that as always.
Awesome.
Awesome. Thank you both. And then if you could share those slides with us, whatever is public, we would love to see them so that and we'll also post them. So if there's certain slides you want me to not post because you said it's still in the works, or if we want to put a disclaimer, just tell me that. Because we can post the things online.
Okay, I will do that. Make sure it's ready for public consumption and send it over to you.
Perfect. Thank you. All right, moving to our next topic, and then we have our guest for UNC back with us again. So I will go through just a real quick update from the program itself, as we've been pretty busy doing lots of things as we're going through all of this. So the first update I want to give to you is that we are in the process of hiring our program manager. We are doing reference checks right now and plan to make an offer this week. So that's super exciting. I will have help in regard to what we're doing from a programmatic perspective, but also just have assistance in addition to our real estate manager and the other folks at OSA that have been helping us. So really do appreciate that. And hopefully I will be able to bring that individual back to you in March so that you can meet them. The other piece is Burnham Yard. Burnham Yard is, a project that you all, depending on how much you've been following our office, we have a transportation study that we're doing right now. We did just close our RFP on our ownership rep, which will look at the redevelopment component of what we could do with the Burnham Yard property, which is right off of 10th and Osage. So that whole project actually is coming to fruition as far as like what we're doing, how we're moving forward. Really excited about the progress we've made. We haven't made our selection choice on the RFP yet, so I can't go into too much discussion about that, but we do have rail alignment options that we'll be looking at to see how much developable land we will have left, which will then hopefully get our buddies at OEdit their dollars back as we start to look through what redevelopment models we have. I know that's a hot topic for everybody, so I'll pause to see if you have any questions about that. Nope. Okay, good. Jeff, anything you want to add about Burnham? Nope. Okay. All right. Also, one last thing with Burnham, we're working with the city and county of Denver on their hiring for their TOD manager, their transportation oriented development manager. So we are on that interview panel. So we've really been trying to create a solid partnership between the city for their small area plan, us, and then also CDOT. So we're like a well-oiled little machine that's really trying to keep aligned with any type of solicitations we're putting out, grants that we're applying for. The P3 office has supported a grant that the city and county of Denver applied for their Chrissy grant, which will allow for them to do some additional things with their small area plan. So I just want to let you all know that that partnership is really strong and we're really excited about that. That's for Burnham Yard. The other piece that I want to share with you is a new tool that I sent out via email. And that particular tool, what I want you to look at this for, this is more informational for you. So this is created by the Department of Early Childhood. And as we're looking to see, who's a registered provider in the state, because most of us don't know all of that information. So I want to make sure we have it in our hands. There's a map and there's actually a table that you can view the data and you can sort it by county, but I won't go into a demo mode because I'm not really good at it and I don't want to do it while you guys are watching. But it'll tell you the licensed provider name, their street address, location, county. But this cool part over here is what I really wanted to highlight. It'll tell us what school district they're in, what award, if they've received one, we can look at that. And then also that expiration date. And then if you scroll over more, it actually tells us what their license capacity is as well. So this is total license capacity for provider. And then over here, you'll see licensed infant capacity, toddler, preschool, and school age capacity. And so I think as we're starting to make decisions and look at different types of childcare that we can, or different types of providers that we can work with, it's always been a question, and I know it's come up a couple of times as well, are there any other childcare providers in your county? Now we have the ability to be able to look at this and see if there's someone located in the county, if there's another provider, how close they are. And so you can sort it by county. So you can click here, you can sort. And then this tells you all of the providers that are licensed, what they're licensed for, and what county they're in. So I think that there's a lot of information that we can pull from this as we're starting to look through some of our funding opportunities. And also if we just have questions in regard to who's licensed out there, who can provide services in specific areas, and what benefit does that bring to us? So I just wanted to share that really quickly with you. I think it's something that we can also bring the Department of Early Childhood into the conversation, and maybe in our meetings later on this spring, we can have them do a demo and talk a little bit about how we can utilize this particular table and the mapping resource as informational when we're making decisions on types of projects and location and proximity, because I know that was a question that came up in a couple of projects. I showed you guys our vacant map tool, but I'll bring it back up for you one more time if I can find it, because I'm really bad at screen sharing. So hold on one second. And our vacant parcel map is really what we're utilizing at the state level to look and see what we have available by parcel. So each purple dot, if you hold over it, and I don't think it works when I'm trying to mouse over, but if you hold over it, it tells you which organization is the owner of that land, the acreage size, square footage size. If it's a unutilized property, you'll see that as well, or an underutilized property. So each of the purple dots represent potential for us to have state land or state unused land or underutilized land as a potential for development on any of our 4 components. So this has been something that we launched a couple weeks ago. The Office of State Architect did this for us, so we're really excited about it. And it is something that I want to continuously use. We can solicit on some of these parcels. So what you'll see is us starting to issue solicitations on parcels. The Steamboat Springs property is one of those potential parcels that we had done a solicitation with the city of Steamboat to see what the best use for that land could be. Right now, it's a proposal that we would use it for housing and early childcare. So, but the solicitation's out, we'll close it, and then we'll bring that project to you all to review and look at as we start to do the study. So just want to give you kind of a heads up. These are the purple dots are where we have potential and opportunity. And you'll see that there's some that are on campuses. You'll see some that are kind of out in the middle of nowhere. And then you see some that are located in proximity to things that would make sense for us to use as potential development. Just wanted to make sure we highlighted those. And if you're interested, let me know if you'd like for the Office of State Architect to come in and demonstrate the map and then some of the overlays that they've done that are really cool. So you can see how close it is to another state building or another state location, how close it is for other things in the city. And, you know, Nicole and I have a dream of maybe being able to do like, you know, school districts and all that kind of stuff overlaid on this map so we can actually see where all of the unused and underutilized land is across the state. Questions on the map? Okay. And then my final update is there's a conference in Dallas. So we are going to actually two more, a conference in Dallas that we will be doing on March 5th through the 8th. I'll be moderating a panel on social infrastructure and how we use P3 as a stronger partnership to develop things like early childcare and housing specifically are the 2 topics we're going to talk about, but I will bring back information for you from that particular panel, but I'll send out the link to the conference so you can take a look and see kind of what we'll be talking about, who's going to be there, and all the information that's necessary for you to generate questions. So that's really exciting. This will be the second panel I've been on in like 8 months. So that's super cool that we've got that available to us. And then the final piece that I will bring to you later, but I want to just do a quick update, is that we have a new project that was inherited. So it's not something that, you know, we'll potentially do a bid, but it's called Glow Park. And that project, Glow Park, is actually located in Jefferson County. And what I'll do is I will send out information in regard to the summary document so you can take a look at it, but we'll have people coming in and doing more discussion about it. Glow Park is basically a combination of an energy park as well as workforce development and potentially housing. So all of the things that we could potentially do in Jeffco with a company known as NREL, which I'm sure many of you are very familiar with. So this global energy park really does bring together several different components and creates a north and south campus. And I'll send this document out to you all so you don't have to try to read it. But what we're looking at doing is assisting in the 100% clean energy and clean net zero carbon emissions by 2050 through creation of this park. It's about 275,000 to 360,000 square feet that can be developed. And it's a partnership, a P3 partnership with NREL, the state, and Jefferson County. In addition, you have a little map that kind of shows the excess area that we'll have. So we've got NREL property in the blue, we've got the state property in yellow in both of these parcels, and then we have this park, and then also Camp George West, which you all know was owned by, or is owned by the state, and we'll be changing that out. And you have this little parcel down here, which is Jeffco. So it's a pretty huge park and it's a pretty huge development. This is still in the very early planning stages. So I just want to make sure that you all know we're not moving forward with anything, but this is a project that was being worked on before our office was created. And had we have been created when this started, we would have taken this project on anyway. So this will be something that we'll start to work on in partnership with several other organizations and state agencies as we start to develop what we call Glow Park. As we start to finish the planning phase for this, I'll bring updates on this project pretty regularly, but I'll share this document so you can take some time to read through it, see what type of prime relationships we're developing, and then also any other questions we can address in our meetings.
Hey, Natrice, just to give the EDC2 a little other reminder, the Glow Park came to the EDC through the EDA Build Back Better application that we provided some state matching funds, not as much for the components that Natrice was focusing on, but for sort of the economic development, renewable energy pieces and components. And that is still scheduled to come back to the EDC for a funding request for the renewable energy infrastructure to attract primary employers onto the park. So this will be swirling around and touching you in a couple of different ways. Just want to make sure, in case the EDC members had heard about it before, you had the sort of the dual context of that.
Thanks, Jeff. Any questions on any of those other projects? Because we're kind of busy. Yes, David.
Just a quick question. Is these 275,000 square feet the orange area on your map or the whole north part of that? I guess the top part of the map. It's the north part of the map, so the top part. But we still need to get layouts from the developer and then also the survey of the land. So there might be less or more developable land. So that was gonna be my next question. So that's why you have a range of square feet. You don't know till the survey comes.
Correct.
Okay. Thanks.
You're welcome. Okay. That's all from me. We have our friends at UNC that are here today. As you all know, we had several questions for them last time and they answered every single one of them. So I did send the Q&A document back out to the commissioners and also want to go through any additional questions that those may have generated. But all of our partners at UNC are here. Did you all want to take a quick minute to introduce yourselves just so we all know who is on the call from UNC's project? Marshall, I'll start with you because I can see you on my screen.
Can you hear us okay? Can you see us?
Yes, we can see you and hear you.
So first of all, Patrice, thank you again so much for inviting us back and for allowing us to answer all the valid and important questions that you and your committee provided. That was very helpful to us to get a sense of your perspectives. We've convened a number of us that you've met last time in this meeting. We'd go around the room and introduce ourselves again before we get started and hope to hear from you with any other questions or comments that you have. I'm Andy Feinstein. I'm the president of the University of Northern Colorado.
I'm Jennifer Alquist in Office of the President.
Kirk Lecklider, Facilities Management.
Sarah Chase, I'm the Interim Director of Human Resources.
And I'm Marshall Parks, and I'm the retired Director of Human Resources. And Scott's on the line with us too, and I see he has my name under his photo. That photo looks a lot better than any photo of me, Scott. So I'll let you introduce yourself there.
Yeah, Scott Bright, ABC Child Development Centers and Bright School Age Centers. Happy to be a part of this project.
Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it. So commissioners, I wanted to take this opportunity to give you time for any questions that you might have based on the information that UNC had provided back to us. I know we had questions on the funding models, and then we also had some questions on the construction cost. Did the questions that were provided by UNC answer all of your questions, or do you have additional things that you'd like to cover?
And Patrice, sorry to interrupt. We also just had Dale Pratt join us, and he is our Vice President for Administration and Finance and our Chief Financial Officer. Hi, Patrice.
Hi, nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
And I also want to thank Nicole and Aletha. That was really interesting to hear. We've been certainly trying to wrestle with how to figure out the right business model for this. And that was really interesting, informative. We really appreciated hearing that. And your group is going to be quite the experts on childcare by the end of this. Clearly, it's an impressive undertaking there.
Carrie, I see you have yourself unmuted. Did you have a question?
Yeah, I don't know if it's a question or not. So I don't retain materials from past meetings ever. It's kind of a rule for me with any board I'm on. But to actually see your business model now that I've been educated a little bit better by Alethea would be my ask, is to sort of see the answers that you provided to us in a pro forma, so that we can understand what your plan is and what your how you're going to address these capacity needs for things like infants and toddlers, now that we understand those are more expensive. And and then that's one comment, is I would like to see a pro forma. The other thing that I really struggle with when it comes to early childcare or these kinds of programs is really in your answer to number 4 of the follow-up questions, which is, I don't want you to take money away from your needs-based scholarships, because that defeats the purpose of doing this. And so I am not sure that I have any recommendation. I have all these ideas in my head now around how do we, I think, Natrice, you said it best, when you refer to generate revenue that then can somehow come back to the state, and so that we can redeploy it for similar projects. And I just don't want the answer to be make it harder for families, and I don't want the answer to be make it harder on your workforce. And so I'm thinking of things like, are there opportunities to use those facilities for something else when the child care center is closed, like, I don't know, art lessons, music lessons, something else that would fit within what your footprint looks like? Or are you thinking about, are there other ways we could reduce the financial ask of the state so that we are not having to make up so much? So maybe are there matching funds available from the city or the county or I don't know what. I'm just really struggling with this notion of what's our responsibility in the unit to the state, to our fellow citizens around the use of our state assets. And at the same time, you are working on a project that is absolutely critical to the state as well. So I'm really torn. Not really question, just a lot of garbage from me.
So, being thoughtful is hard work, so we appreciate that. So, I think the pro forma piece that they spoke about earlier, I think actually absolutely we'd be more than happy to complete that. And I think having a common format for all of you to review the request makes perfect sense. And we've done our best to put it in a format that made some sense to us, but I think using a common format absolutely is helpful. And I think, as Nicole and Alethea really articulated well, there's only so many levers in this math equation. And as you look at ways to meet the needs that we have in our community and meet the needs of the P3 program, it's every child care provider opportunity that you look at is going to have these same elements and these same challenges. And I think one of the reasons that I feel very confident is that we do have a partner who has been doing this for 50 years. And so I do feel good that we've got somebody that has figured out how to make those levers work. Two of our community at extraordinarily high level. If you look at the people that are 5-star rated in providing childcare in communities, it is a very, very short list, and Scott and his team is on it. So I have every confidence that the investment will result in high quality care for the children in Northern Colorado and Greeley. That part I feel really good about, and the rest of the levers make all of us nervous too. Yeah, and I think trying to make it affordable for our students and our employees in our community is always the challenge. And Scott, I don't know if you want to jump in on anything additional on, I'd say that's kind of a question you asked, or just the observation. Scott, if you have anything else that you'd share on.
Yeah, child care, early childhood education, all of it is a challenging ball of wax to keep together. It's what we specialize in. It's what we do. And with regard to a comment that you might have made a little bit earlier, and that is like, what about the use for the building when we're not open? I see this building open 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. Monday through Friday, every day, all the way through the whole year. So I'm not sure there are a whole lot of other uses that, could be made for this building, but we definitely intend to provide the community and the campus, everyone around it with, the best care that's available. So looking forward to that.
And I think one of the other pieces that was mentioned earlier in the conversation too, is I think we have some pretty significant workforce advantages here. I think one of the hardest challenges for everybody, and Scott and everyone in the community that provides the services, our location on campus and proximity to our College of Education and our early childhood departments is a significant advantage to us, to being able to keep good, high quality teachers in those classrooms for, I don't know how many of our students you already employ, Scott, but I think the proximity is going to make that a significant advantage over other opportunities too.
Absolutely. And we're not always able to, pull UNC students up into our Windsor Center or our Alt Center or the west side of Greeley, even for that matter, just because of transportation concerns. And so it opens the door for workforce and those career pathways directly from the classroom to the work environment. So looking forward to that.
Thank
Thank you. I
you.
really appreciate your comments. And I'm sorry, Natrice.
Go ahead, President Feinstein. Go ahead.
I appreciate your comments. I think that we can certainly work on the pro forma. I think initially we were trying to respond to the structure that we're creating for this proposal, but we're more than happy to modify that and develop that into a pro forma and a business plan that more kind of clearly combines all these disparate pieces into one document. So we will do that. I'm also going to take you up on that idea. I'm just going to start getting rid of all of my materials after my meetings. I like that idea. That might help me a little bit. So appreciate that comment as well. Do you really do that?
Yeah, a little free legal advice for you there.
Very good point.
Lawyers can then help you remember what happened.
Good point.
I think that's why we have our 30-day delete policy as well at the state, where it just automatically goes away if you don't put like a special code behind it, but I won't share that after what I just shared. David, did you have any questions that you wanted to ask from the additional follow-up?
Yeah, I think just a couple questions. I don't know, Scott, if this is for you or for you, Andy, but can you share with us who the general contractor you're proposing is?
I could take that. This is Kirk. We would either bid the project out or select a CMGC after we have funding. If we do a hard bid, we need to design it first. So we won't know the general contractor for a while yet.
Okay. It's kind of a catch-22 because I feel like the longer we wait, the higher your costs are going to be. But without more detail, it's hard for me to really give Natrice my opinion. So it's kind of a catch-22. I think what I heard earlier was good. It would be nice to see the pro forma given what we've learned about these centers, because I personally would like to see, things like what is UNC going to be charging the provider, if anything, to operate it, just the basics that I think a pro forma would help us flesh out, given the tight margins on these facilities. Carrie and I have to think about this, 30, 40 years down the road. And so the here and now is good, but I think the pro forma is going to help answer some of my additional questions. But I think the GC was kind of the main one. I'm really after, the concerns are, you guys have a budget today, and then you get it designed, you come back to us and it's 9 million or 10.5 million or 11 million, right? I mean, that's a very real possibility. So
it is one of the reasons that I did have a large general contractor help with the budget for the project.
okay.
Yeah, we're dealing with that, on multiple projects as well, that certainly the uncertainty, the timing, it's really about, that's why I think we're trying to expedite this process as quickly as we can, because that will, I think, will help us manage cost overruns. It's kind of longer that we stretch this out, David, as you know, in these uncertain times, those are certainly concerns of ours, and that's why working closely with contractors is important, but also going to bid or doing some structure, which we have some truly fair and competitive pricing is important to us.
And I think Natrice has been very helpful too in offering, trying to help us find other partners to participate in this, and has shared our information with a number of partners, and again, conversations with District 6 and others, trying to find other sources of partners for this that bring something to the table too, to help us if we do start to see some change in some of those costs, that we have more partners to share this with.
Yeah, and I'm not sure, Natrice, this is a question as it is just comment, quasi question here, is that are applicants required to go through a competitive bid if we evaluate construction costs? Or, I mean, not competitive bid, but there's got to be some competitive nature to it, I would imagine. But I don't know the answer to that, because that's going to, getting 3 or 4 bids on this is it's going to add some weeks, if not months, to this for these guys.
Yeah, I think it depends on the project, to answer your question. So with one of them, for Steamboat, for example, we're doing the bid upfront on what it looks like to have the model. The thing about UNC is they were our first submission, so they're getting all the questions of like, oh goodness, now we need X information. We still have to take this through our expedited process through the CDC, so they can even tell us whether or not they will grant us permission to be able to repurpose this parking lot. So I think as we're looking at it, now we know that we want to work with them to understand their pro forma. And now we know that we want to have more information in regard to their partners. And so I think what you'll start to see is, in some cases, yes, we'll do solicitation first. In some cases, they'll come to us with a model. And I think the piece for UNC that we've seen is that they have individuals within their organization that can help with a build out cost estimate. But it sounds like what you all are wanting is a more solid understanding of who the partners are, who's bringing what dollars to the table. Is the full ask for the 8 million? Is it for less because of the partners? And so we can modify that. But as the original proposal was submitted, we didn't have a lot of that information because we've still been trying to work through this process. So that's the perks and the downsides of being our first submission, is that you have more hoops that you might have to jump through that we wouldn't have necessarily anticipated if it would have been a later submission.
We're nothing if not a learning institution, so we're here to help everyone learn. That's our purpose.
No, I appreciate that. Thank you. That was all the questions I had.
So I just really think we have a policy question, Natrice. I don't know who needs to answer it, and maybe it goes back to the legislature somehow, which I don't want to do because I really don't want to slow down. This is important. But I don't want the answer to the question of, is the state supposed to have some revenue coming back to it, to mean that we're going to somehow compromise the viability of the project. And so I really think we need to understand for this type of P3 project, what are our real expectations? What do we have to do? What's our remit here? And maybe it's going to be the same thing for the mental health projects. I can see broadband's going to be totally different, but like this, I don't want to penalize a project like this because of that notion, and I don't have clarity around it in my head. So
yeah, I agree. I don't think we take it back to the legislature.
Yeah, I just don't know who to take it to.
I think what we do is we look at each project individually and not try to square peg round hole every project. UNC's submission is going to be very different than some other project submissions that we have. And as long as we create guardrails around it to say, here's what a financing model looks like. We have expertise from Epic, we have expertise from Scott, we have conversations and expertise within UNC that I think we can lean on, project specifically. But I do think the broader question and what we're bringing someone in March to talk to us about is what they call revenue generation, but what also P3 experts call, you know, consideration payments, or payments that are made but still don't jeopardize the functionality and the viability of the project, so that Scott and his team are not ending up being, you know, struggling with the project to keep it open because of the cost that the state has. So that presentation is coming to you in March, so we can have those discussions. But in the meantime, what I'd like to do is ask for us to continue to work with UNC on the pro forma model so that you can get the answers to the questions that you have. And then you all will need to send to me your revised scoring sheets so that we can determine if this is a funded project or if we have additional questions. And so I don't want to belabor the discussion, but I do think that there are some things that I believe a pro forma would help to answer. And I think that, you know, UNC has been very open to coming back and answering more questions and talking more through what we're going to do. And then we would still have to take this project to the CDC, which I can typically get on agendas within a month. So we do have that opportunity. And then after that decision is made, if this project is chosen to be funded, I would like to take you all, and Kurt, you can tell me if this is not going to work, but I'm sure it will, take you on a tour of what it actually looks like. Because when they took me out, I was like, oh, this makes sense to me about how we would put it in proximity to the school and the college, and then access roads. So I think what I'd like to do is, when it gets a little warmer and is less snowy outside, if we choose to fund this project, I would like you all to do a tour of it to see what exactly it is that they're talking about. Because it's one thing to look at it on a map. It's another thing to actually go out there and see all of the questions that you guys have, visually look at what that could potentially mean for us.
Be happy to do that.
Yeah, and then Teresa, I think we will be great partners on this, because I think, you know, Scott has a mature business model in our community. We're not guessing about what things are going to cost or how things might work. We're guessing on the construction costs. So I'm like everyone in the world, but the business model is a mature, very clear business model. And I think that pro forma will show where that margin is, Carrie, to talk about the kinds of things we could, because there are certainly ways that we can perhaps generate some revenue. But again, you know, we will have a fully mature pro forma for you to look at that I think we can rely on, that maybe not everyone will have in your conversations, just because of the nature of our involvement in our community for 130 years and Scott's team's involvement in our community for 50 years, being the business model is clear, the good and bad of it.
Awesome. I can't imagine that any business model is not going to include good and bad. And I just want the cost of like wood to go down, so that way if you aren't building it, or steel, or whatever it is that you're using, wish that we'd see a decrease in inflation, but I know that that's not a thing. So I think what we'll do is, Marshall, I will reach out to you so that we can get like kind of like a understanding of your pro forma. We won't bring you back unless we have a request, but what'll happen is we can send that out via email, and then the commissioners can send me their scoring, and then I can let you all know if we are choosing to fund it based off of the pro forma and additional questions that they may have. And then we can either move forward with CDC or just kind of have the discussion about what next steps are.
And always available to answer any questions. And I think between the financial expertise we have on campus and Scott's expertise, we can get that turned around fairly quickly. What I understood it to be like from the discussion earlier, I think that's something we can get back to you in a timely manner.
Of course, you always do. And then a tour.
That sounds like a lot more fun. So we just opened up some brand new, beautiful dining options in our university center. We just have a partnership that we entered into a couple of years ago that's starting to bear some fruit now too. So we'll have a really nice lunch, and Andy knows how to host a lunch. We'll have a great time. So,
yeah, I think we like to eat, so that's always good. Food to the soul. Okay, perfect. Carrie, David, since you're the only two commissioners, are there any other questions that you all had? Otherwise, I'll start sending out a templated pro forma that we can work on, and then we'll get it back out to you all so that you can send your scoring in. Thank you, everyone at UNC. It's good to see you all. Thanks, Scott. Appreciate you all.
Thanks so much. Thank you.
Always appreciate it. Bye-bye.
Bye. Okay, other pieces, good discussion, you all. And I think, you know, Carrie, to your point, we do have some additional areas that we could hone in on, because I feel like actually mental health and behavioral health are going to be even more challenging than early childcare, to be quite honest with you, because you have a lot of, well, who's paying on the insurance and which insurance, like how is it being covered? And we have had some discussions that some groups have reached out in regard to behavioral and mental health. So I think we're going to have another tackle that we'll have in that area. The other piece that I want to add, and this is not in relation to UNC's project specifically, is that we have had more questions come in about mixed use development to include childcare and housing. And so I think with that model, Alethea, I'd be curious about your thought process on like the slide deck that you showed, like, do we add cost? And if we're really calling it affordable housing, as we're looking at Senate Bill 1 that's going through, and as we're looking at other things, what model on top of what you're talking about in EPIC's model really does work if you add affordable housing component? Like, what does that mean? Is it specific to the community? What AMIs are we looking at? What community resources are we going to have? So I think we have a couple of hurdles that we'll have to take on when it comes to funding mechanisms and what that looks like. And do we have mixed use development that has market rate housing and then also affordability, and then like some mixture of both to determine what that looks like? So I'm sure we're going to actually find that out with Steamboat, to be quite honest with you.
Yeah, and that's going to be a really interesting project to look at. The other living example is the Rhino development. I forget what they call it, but it houses Open Air Academy. So it has affordable housing units, market rate housing units, I believe a cafe, and then Open Air Academy. So that's a model for mixed use development. And I can connect you. I think it's Jeff that heads up that development. So, you know, I can connect him with you guys so you can talk a little bit about the model and how that works. But that's essentially what you have to do, right? If you're going to monetize the space and also make space available for something that's not as revenue generating, like childcare, usually that means some sort of commercial space, like a food or a cafe, and then you condo out some of the units or make them, you know, market rate, and then the others are affordable housing, and then the childcare serves both the affordable housing community and market rate, right? So that would allow them to accept 15% CCAP, for example, right? And once you go above 15% CCAP, it gets a lot harder within that profitability model, you know. So for those providers that have 50% CCAP, 80% CCAP, you'll see that their margins are usually break even, right, for their operations, because it's just too hard. And then those people that either serve no CCAP or low percentages under 15% or under will draw that small profit usually, right, that we were talking about. But a small profit is still sustainability, right? And so if that childcare operator occupies that space and it's normally $30 a square foot in Rhino, right, but they get it for $8 a square foot, that's a viable model. Plus that developer becomes commercial property tax exempt if that provider is a nonprofit, right? And so those pieces, you know, we haven't pushed the commercial property tax exemption yet far enough to apply to for-profit land or building owners that house a for-profit childcare, right? But that would also be excellent. And so that's kind of how I see those working together, right? You incentivize the developer themselves to include childcare and ensure that the childcare operator has access to that space at below market or free cost by monetizing the other pieces of the mixed development.
Makes sense. I think also in our March presentation, the person that I have coming in to talk to us is from Washington, D.C. and like used to run Washington, D.C.'s P3 office, and talks a lot about what financing models worked for them. They didn't do early childcare and housing, but there are some additional best practices that they utilize that can show kind of what are we looking for, what is a P3, what's not. And it's interesting, like when I talk to him, he tells me, he's like, yeah, only about 10% of projects are actually P3 projects, just based on the ability for you to be able to generate exactly what you're talking about, but then still create a viable model that it doesn't put the company or the business in a bad space on state land. So
yeah, and is there a percent of your total investment in the project that needs to return as generated revenue?
No, not right now, but I think we can change that if necessary as we start to look at different pro formas. Like, because this is the first year, we had to create rules and guidelines to follow, which we have. But then I think we can flexibly move those around and change them and say, you know, hey, we're only going to actually accept unsolicited proposals this time of year. And this is your cap, and this is how much we're going to be able to fund. And this is the percentage requirements. But I think we still have some work to do in that space so that we understand what type of projects we're going to be getting, what type we're going to solicit. Because I know we've got a couple that are coming up as solicitations that we'll need to figure out, but it all depends on developable land, market rate or below, lease rates that we can charge on a ground lease, and how long, the longevity of it, 50-year, 99-year, what does that look like?
And you guys have to charge market rate for the state land and buildings? No, you can charge whatever. You can just
charge
have it.
what is the best model for the project. If we sell it, we have to sell it at market rate.
Okay, that's what you had said before, if you sell the actual property.
Correct.
Well, I think that's something that could, you know, still work for childcare providers. If there's no parameters around what the revenue generation or return has to be, I mean, you know, some childcare projects will be able to give back what, $2,000 at run rate to the state, and the UNC project is claiming more around 215K, right? And so understanding what those levels of return are and if there's requirements there also kind of puts the green light on that revenue and profitability component, right? So if you say, look, we're going to fund 8 childcare projects with 9 million of these dollars or whatever it is, right? And the total revenue generation from those projects will only be $500,000, but it builds these childcare, you know, supply issues within the communities. If that's a viable take back to the P3 office and, you know, the fund generations there, then I think it could work, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Good. Okay. Thanks for that. Next steps is for UNC specifically, you all we'll get a pro forma back from them. And then I'll ask that the commissioners send me your revised, if they have changed scoring sheets. If they have not changed, I already have them. But if they have changed and you have additional things or different scores that you want to initiate based on the information you got, we'll move forward with that. We will be bringing AHEC to the conversation in March. They have submitted a project proposal, which is housing, early child care, and several other, and then it also has some commercial. So the model that we just talked about. So that'll be coming to us in March. We also have Seth Gabriel from Washington, D.C. that'll come talk to us about innovation and what a P3 is and what the state can utilize as a best practice. And then we're still awaiting Stratton's responses to the questions that you all had. And then we have another one that's supposed to be coming in, but that probably won't hit you until April. So lots of things in the cooker, but also thank you for all of your support and efforts and questions so that we can get all the things right as we're doing this and moving forward.
Yes, well, hopefully all of you feel brushed up on the childcare business model. I saw you were already putting that to use, so well done.
Taking a lot of notes, Alethea. Thank you so much. I mean,
Of course.
actually it was very helpful because you don't ask the questions in the way that you know how to ask them. I mean, I don't, so.
No, it's totally understandable. And it is an elusive area for so many of us, even though we understand, you know, business operations, right? It's difficult to see how that works. So happy to lend that. And so thank you so much, Natrice, for inviting us to give a little talk, and to all the commissioners again for allowing us to listen in on these calls. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Okay, I will see you in March, and we'll post the presentation online so no one has to keep it. It'll just be on our website. It'll be fine.
Awesome. Thank
right.
you so much, Natrice. Thanks for all your hard work.
Yeah,
No
thanks,
problem.
Natrice.
Bye.
Bye.